Hello and welcome to another SonicLAB. It's been a little while since we've done one of these, but strange times mean strange timetabling. But it's here. We're going to take a look at the Pulsar-23. This is the brand new, well, not so brand new, drum machine slash drum synth, modular synth. It's hard to describe what it is. It's essentially a drum synthesizer from SOMA Laboratories. It was first introduced at Superbooth last year, which was the last physical one that we had, and it was a bit of a hit. Everybody was just like, wow, this is amazing. And it follows that kind of trajectory that Vlad Kreimer, who's the sort of genius behind the SOMA Laboratory stuff, the trajectory he seems to take, which he comes up with these really interesting concepts in instruments, Lyra 8 being another one. This one, bonkers though it is more traditional than perhaps some of his other stuff, because there's the pipe as well, which is really mad. But what this is a 4-channel drum synthesizer at its basic core, with lots of modular potential and all kinds of interesting bits and pieces that you can do. Each channel has its own CV recorder, so it does have pattern-based stuff, and you can have trigger externals and CV coming in from modular, but you can also route things via MIDI. So in that way, you know, it is actually quite traditional. So you could voice it up like a traditional MIDI drum machine voice and play that and sequence it via your DAW for all that kind of good stuff. One of the big differences between this and a regular modular is all of the patch points are these kind of posts, which are sort of metal posts, which you then clip crocodile clips onto to kind of create these connections. Or if you're feeling particularly jazzy, you can grab and hold and make connections via your fingers, though I don't think this is quite as efficient as just doing the direct connectivity. It's built like a tank, much like the Lyra 8. It's really beautifully solid. This is the orange version. There are other colours available. I haven't looked inside, but if it's anything like the Lyra 8, the internals are also a thing of beauty. They're really nicely hand built. And this thing has proved to be a huge success. They're very hard to come by at the moment, but you know, they're building them as fast as they can. So the 4 voices are as follows. This is the kick drum voice. We can have pitch modulation, which is like an envelope. Got attack, so we could create more of a tone. We can add drive, which gives us this sort of a separate drive circuit, so a much harder kick, so you can get these sort of really hard techno style sounds. Then we've got a synth voice, which is, I think this is a digital aspect, which gives us a modulable wave shape with a warp function, which has got a really interesting sound. We can tune it, it's also got quite a powerful filter. And we can modulate these via the posts or via MIDI input signals as well, just by pressing learn. And this also doubles as a percussion voice, which is a different mode. Which can create some really interesting metallic sort of clangs and crackles. Then we've got a clap, which has a high Q bandpass filter with a sort of tunable noise. We can modulate that via an external input as well. So quite a variety of sounds just from that snare. I'd say bordering on the clap side. All of these got a little MIDI learn button on, so you can press learn and then trigger them on a specific note or a specific MIDI channel, so it's really easy to set up. And then a cymbal slash ring mod noise source, again with an attack release, and it goes from sort of quite clangy, weird, to your regular sort of almost sort of 808 slash, you know, analog drum, analog synth voice, analog cymbal, I guess. Got an LFO dual effects, distortion, which is similar to the Lyra, which gives us a real crunch to it, and a chaos engine, which does a lot of other great things. But those are essentially the voices that we're dealing with. And it is quite chaotic. It comes with a whole bunch of these crocodile jacks, and when you plug it in, when you get a really, you can imagine it kind of looks a bit like that. Each of the channels has a CV recorder. Okay, so this is completely unquantized. There's no, there's no quantization. So we've got 4 basically presets of CV recorders, though this is volatile. It's only going to be there while the machine's on. Right, so let's try and take a patch apart while we create some recording, just to sort of give an idea of how we can trigger this thing. So we'll start off with a metronome. I've got a clock coming out of here, which is this green one here, which is at 2 intervals division. So that basically comes back out and into the mix input, which means that I can monitor a metronome, which means I'm not having to kind of think about recording blind. So the next thing I'm going to come out of the, that looks like an 8s output. And that's going into a trigger converter and then back into the trigger input of the hi-hat. So I'm not playing anything. So that's just basically clocking. So I haven't recorded anything yet. So now I'm just going to go into record mode on my kick drum channel. I could do this via MIDI, but I'm going to do this on this at the moment. So 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's my recording. Then let's have a look and see what's going on the clap. So I might do this actually on this guy. So I've got this set up here, so I'm going to put that in. Or I'm going to put that in on here. I'm just going to go. And I've got some additional hi-hat pickups which are going in via MIDI. So I'm using a combination of the clock trigger. Let's take the metronome down. So now we've got our bass sound. So let's see what's going on here. So I've got a sequence running on my bass sound, which is just a set of notes. So let's just do some triggers. 1, 2, 3. That's terrible. That's actually quite hard to do. So what I'm going to do is I'll forget that. Let's come out of the same outputs of the hi-hats and we'll just trigger the bass drums. So I've got my MIDI sequence running on this guy. I'm running the clock into here as well. And let's start messing around with the sound. I've got the output of this guy going into this knob here, which is going to the delay. Drive. Wowza. Hi-hat's getting a bit of loss, so I'm going to come out of the hi-hat output and go out to a separate output. Whoa, so I mean, that was a fairly pedestrian pattern, but I was very quickly getting into all kinds of mess because, in a good way, so I was using the distortion, I was using clocking, I was using the CV recorders, and I was just recording a whole bunch of stuff in the sequencer and then tweaking the parameters. And this is the thing about this device, it very quickly, once you find a little groove, you can just follow that, and it's very much of the moment thing. Although if you were just looking for a killer kick drum sound, you can hook it up to your MIDI stuff, hit MIDI learn, and just sort of really bash it, and maybe into the distortion, the drive, you might want to add all of those things. I mean, the bottom line is there's just so much of this. Right, I'm going to attempt to explain some of the more esoteric functions now, because there's a lot of stuff in here that is almost, you know, is beyond me in many ways, but some of it that is incredibly useful and incredibly creative. So I'll try and demonstrate some of this while sort of creating something, hopefully, that has a musical relevance. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically using the KeySet Pro. I'm using the different channels to do various things. I'll try and explain what I'm doing while I'm going. But first of all, let's start off. I've got a sequence running, which is literally just continuous note on the main synth channel and a pulse on the kick channel. It's in tune. So I've got various clock things coming out here. First of all, I've got a clock coming out into my chaos generator. Now this is the sort of chaos or sample and hold. There are a number of things I'm doing here. First of all, I'm taking an output from the Arturia, which I'm taking the velocity of sequence track 3, which isn't triggering anything. I'm going into this peg here and then coming out of there, and that's going into the data peg of the sample and hold. That's because this, as well as just being a sort of quite complex sample and hold, different kind of potential and its own clock, as well as being externally clocked. I'm clocking this from the main clock, so it's in time. I'm able to record values, CV values, into the registers in this. So let's just take a listen. So I'm coming out, so let's just plug this output into the filter. So let's now turn this up. So you can see what's going on here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to record a different set of values in. Got a different rhythm. So let's try another one. So you see what's happening there? It's quite interesting, is I'm actually able to record values into the sample and hold and use it like another sequencer and clock it from the main clock. Don't like that one, I'll just play a different one. So I've got another clock which is basically going into this little resistor thing. Now this is a little resistor thing. I think it just sort of shortens it immensely, so it doesn't have a clock pulse. It's just got a bit. So I'm going to plug that into the trigger. So I've got another rhythm. Another thing that I'm doing is I'm taking the clock from the LFO, I'm clocking the LFO and I'm modulating the delay. I don't know if you can see that closer up. So I'm creating a kind of chorusy effect by using the LFO to modulate the delay, all coming from the master clock again. Let's see. Let's record something into this CV controller. Remember, this is a 4-bar. The note. interesting. So what I'm using here are a number of, I'm using the various different clockings, I'm using some of these trigger pins, I'm using the Chaos generator, minimally I have to say. I'm also using the modulation output from the velocity output, and using that to drive the sequence into this. And then I'm using the LFO to modulate. So these are some of the other things that we're kind of able to do. So let's just... let's try a different pattern. Off I go again. What I'm demonstrating is, you know, there are all these, a lot of these things I'm just thinking, oh, I wonder what that does, and I just plug it in and go, oh, that's neat. And there are so many ways to route things up. Before you know it, you're off into this kind of like, yes, very limited, 4 voices only groove, but the amount of modulation and the amount of things that you can do with it, bearing in mind we can also add the MIDI aspect to it, which I was only really using that to record into the Chaos generator here. There's so much stuff that we can do. Other things to bear in mind, these 1/4-inch jack posts here come out here on the back, so we can actually bring out individual voices and throw them out into the mix. So in terms of a sort of real life drum machine, it's actually quite useful. I mean, you could use this live. You'd have separate outputs for 4 voices plus the effects. Maybe you might just be able to get away with that, although it's a mono thing. I mean, the only thing I will say is it's a shame that we can't record into the CV converters any other way than from the pads. There's no way of kind of triggering it in, maybe from MIDI, and having a really lock solid thing. It's just not possible. I mean, also bear in mind that we can clock these guys individually. So if we wanted to really mess it up and modulate the clock, we could do all of that stuff. And there are a lot of examples of that kind of thing, which is just more of your sort of noise, chaotic stuff. But it's very capable of doing some beautiful, some relevant, and some interesting pieces as well. Okay, let's have a look at a couple of other things, because I want to use the LFO. The LFO is actually pretty interesting. It's got quite a lot of potential, because it's not only is it clockable, but it also goes into very high audio rates. So let's just take a look at this patch. I'm just going to press actually go on the key step, because I'm triggering the MIDI from here. It's just a bit easier to demonstrate in this particular situation. So I'm just clocking. I'm playing the sequence on the bass line from this guy. Then I'm just running a clock into. Let's take this down. Just doing that. Then I'm taking another clock out into the hi-hats. Let's just do that directly. So it's going like that. But what I'm also doing is, well, we'll get onto that in a sec. We'll just keep that going. Just keep that. And then we'll bring... So the LFO is clocked, but it's the triangle wave is coming out and into attenuate and modulating the frequency. So now we've got... audio rate mod of this. So we can get that almost talking filter. So that's one thing I wanted to show you. Because this is clocked, this is doing beat divisions. So now let's take let's just come out of here. We'll take the trigger out of here. We're going to go into this triggered gate. Then we're going to come out of the triggered gate into the trigger. So what this is doing is, see if we can actually, can we close up on that? This is basically taking the LFO and it's opening the gate on the signal from the LFO. So ordinarily it'd be just doing 16ths, but I can actually just have it sort of randomly open and close to a clocked LFO. That's just another useful utility, this sort of CV controlled gate. So that'll let signals in when it gets the right CV signal. So there's basically quite a nice useful of the extra little utilities here and the speed of the LFO. Price is €1,500 direct from SOMA Laboratories, which may seem like a lot of money, but actually this is 4 comprehensive drum voices. So if you imagine each one of these was a module, all of these utilities, all of the stuff it does, the effects, the LFO, the CV recorders, the chaos generator, the clocking, the clock division, which you could make it play nicely with your other stuff. It's actually, I think it's quite reasonably priced. I mean, yeah, if they were a massive factory in China, I'm sure they could make it cheaper, but it'd be a very different thing. That's not what they're into. They're into small, craft-built, beautiful things. And this is a beautiful thing. And I find it personally very inspiring. So, downsides. Well, I guess the fact that we can't quantize really the CV inputs and we can't record into them any other way via the posts could be seen as a limitation, but we do have MIDI, so we can, if we want to get into the grid, we can use the grid that way. It would just be nice if there was a little bit more cross-pollination between the two. Other thing is sometimes it can get a bit messy and chaotic. While I understand the way these posts are done, it's probably going to last longer. It might just be a little bit I don't know, just a little bit chaotic for some people in terms of patching, but I think, to be honest, it's a small price to pay. Other things are, there are a little bit, the sort of mode switching and the changing with combinations of these switches, which I don't really go into, can be a little bit confusing initially, but you just got to read the manual. In fact, you do really need to read the manual to find out what a lot of these things do, because I didn't go into, we've got these little CV outputs, which I guess are triggers that just send stuff out that can be used again performatively. We've also got these VCAs which we can modulate. We've got an inverter, we've got various gates, controlled gates. There's a lot of utility in here that is actually very, very powerful and quite niche. And if you bought them as individual modules, they probably stack up to be quite a lot of money. I mean, the bottom line is it's a really fun and inspiring instrument to play with. Most people, the lucky people who've got hold of theirs so far, just kind of, it blows your mind. It's not like a drum machine, you can't save patterns. Use MIDI if you want to do that, but if you just want to do something that was performance based and really kind of like just get in and go off on a journey, it's quite an unusual thing in that respect. I mean, I don't know of any other drum machines available, that could work standalone that could do that. So the SOMA Laboratory Pulsar-23 definitely gets a thumbs up from me. I think it's another great inspired design instrument from the mind of Vlad, Kreimer and the team. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.